So I'm Kristján Burgess. I've spent the last 4 years at UNESCO, where the motto is, since wars begin in the minds of men, it's in the minds of men that defenses of peace must be constructed. And I think it's a powerful message for all of us. And this has been an extremely powerful day, listening to these wonderful speakers coming from different parts of the world to inspire and encourage us here in Iceland to improve what's possible and get ideas of what can be done from here. The session that we're starting now is called Protecting Rights Together, the role of the UN in the current human rights struggles. And we have a keynote speaker, and then we have a panel coming up. And we will start with Katja Creutz, who is the program director for the Global Security and Governance Program of the Finnish Institute for International Affairs. And then we have a panel discussing these topics. In the time of diminishing trust in global organizations, rising authoritarianism, and the backlash on human rights across the world. And of course, we have to address the realities on the ground, but I will try, and we will try to discuss also the ways forward and what can be done in a country like Iceland, what the government, what the civil society, what the people at large can do to bring about a brighter future than what we are seeing around the world today. But allow me first to invite to the stage Katja Creutz, the program director for the Finnish Institute for International Affairs. You have the floor now, and then I will invite the other speakers and introduce them after your presentation. Welcome.
So I hope you can hear me well. Okay. So thank you first to the organizers for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be in Iceland again. So I really enjoyed it. But I also want to echo Jessica in this, that it has been a wonderful day. It's been emotions. It's been tears, I would say. And that's not often that these things happen at the conference. So I'm going to represent the boring expert who will not provoke any tears, I hope. But that has really been refreshing, I think, and important as well. So, dear audience, in 2006, at the inauguration of the UN Human Rights Council, which celebrates 20 years next year, the then Secretary General Kofi Annan stated, and I quote, "I venture to hope, and I suggest it should be your ambition, that within 5 years your work will have so clearly established the Human Rights Council's authority that there will be a general will to amend the Charter and to elevate it to the status of a principal organ of the United Nations." Unquote. Kofi Annan, I'm not sure he was an optimist, but he headed the UN in very different times. Today, human rights are less and less mainstreamed into the UN work. Some permanent members of the Security Council still do not see the connection between human rights and international peace and security. Civil society space is shrinking, and the human rights component of peacekeeping missions witnesses pushbacks. Also, human rights institutions like the International Criminal Court face direct questioning. In the words of the current Secretary General himself, human rights are under attack. Hardly anyone claims that we are close to fulfilling the UN's mandate of protecting fundamental human rights, one of its 3 main pillars. We are grappling with the serious human rights violations in different places, like we heard today, Gaza, Ukraine, but there's also many other dire conflicts, Sudan, Myanmar, and so forth. Decisions on ending development aid also negatively affects human rights promotion and protection. The UN is not immune to the deteriorating international political environment, quite the opposite. The work in the World Organization to promote and protect human rights faces headwinds. These include geopolitical rivalry that extends to foundational rules of international law, including human rights, but it also suffers from lack of leadership and financial difficulties. China has raised its stakes in human rights governance. It has systematically sought to remove human rights from the center of the international order by launching alternative human rights concepts, blocking human rights financing at the UN, and hindering civil society involvement in human rights scrutiny. China privileges developmentalism, thus leaving the level of human rights protection to be decided by national conditions. By increasingly shaping the human rights agenda at the Human Rights Council to its own likings, China has attracted the attention and cooperation of many countries of the so-called Global South. By shifting human rights language away from legal obligations to cooperation and capacity building, human rights are undermined. Russia emerges as a disruptor, and other authoritarian states want to shape the agenda as well. A traditional ally of Europeans in many human rights matters, the United States, is also giving Western democracies headache. With the United States having left the Council and also recently announced its departure from the Universal Periodic Review, other Western states are left to carry the torch of human rights further. In many respects, the expectations for the leadership in human rights matters fall on the European Union. However, the European Union deals with its own populist and authoritarian challenges. Besides all the great power turmoil that affects human rights promotion and protection, the shortage in UN financing has even closed down parts of UN Geneva and forced electricity cuts. One is indeed left wondering, who will become a human rights champion and how is this to be done? How is refocus on human rights in the UN to be achieved? And what role will the UN have in setting and maintaining international standards? The UN cannot be more than its member states want it to be. When member states do not pay their financial contributions owed to the organization or withdraw funding from specific sectors, this will affect human rights protection by the World Organization. For example, the Refugee Agency has cut down 5,000 jobs only in this year. Of the UN contributions, only 61 states have, out of 193 member states, have paid their contributions in full this year. Yet we can all agree that there are no alternative institutions to the United Nations, despite its shortcomings. Which other organization would deliver 2 billion doses of vaccines to children around the world, or give food aid to 120 countries like the World Food Programme does, or provide over 60,000 peacekeepers to fragile environments? If the international community would try to create a new charter for a different kind of world organization, it would most certainly fail, as the divisions among states are only deepening. When it comes to the halls of UN Geneva and New York, the political climate has left the human rights sphere defensive rather than progressive. A defensive stance is needed to protect existing rights. The authoritarian voices are getting stronger in the UN Human Rights Council, filling the void left by the United States. And one such group is the Group of Friends in Defense of the Charter of the United Nations. It was founded in 2021 and consists of 18 member states, including countries like Russia, China, Venezuela, Cuba, Zimbabwe, and Nicaragua. And these autocracies align their statements through the different UN bodies and seek to push a counter-narrative to the established norms in human rights. Some have even labeled this a power grab. Instead of condemning the system, they engage and change it from within. While the political climate is not conducive to setting new standards on human rights, China and Russia have managed to coordinate their actions, for example, when it comes to the new Cybercrime Convention, to such a degree that there are no realistic or meaningful human rights safeguards. And these new norm makers do not value human rights. And this is reflected also in the new international rules and standards coming out from the UN. So Western states should either get used to this or devise their own effective strategies. Much of the debates today on multilateral cooperation and global governance highlight the major powers of the world: China, US, India, Russia, and the European Union. However, the vast majority of UN member states are small states, not major powers. Hence, the power is in numbers. Small states are not disempowered. Together, they are strong proponents of the UN Charter, multilateral cooperation, and international law. Small states who like to see the UN system functioning are also solution-oriented, and they come from the north and south, west and east, and they are developed or developing. For example, the right to a clean and healthy environment arose from small island states who pushed the agenda hard. Small states are nevertheless underrepresented in the UN Human Rights Council, as they sometimes lack permanent representation in Geneva. They don't have the human and financial resources to work for human rights. And their participation should be supported financially and through other arrangements. There are small or middle-sized states that are known for carrying the work for human rights further. The 5 Nordic states are important contributors to the UN human rights work, and they have been members on several occasions in the Human Rights Council. Also, the Nordic members of the European Union are at the forefront in human rights protection. The Nordics span many cooperation groups, from the Mountain Group to the NB8 with the Baltic states. And together their voices are amplified, even though they are not similar in all respects. The Nordic states are in an excellent position to build bridges to small and medium-sized states on other continents. And this is exemplified by Finland's resolution on intersex persons, together with Australia, Chile, and South Africa. Denmark pursued the linkage between human rights and sustainable development, together with Chile, and Iceland has been promoting equal pay, together with Panama and South Africa. New partnerships must be sought. It is important that the Human Rights Council features countries that dare to be principled and speak up on countries with a record of serious human rights violations. Also here, the Nordics can play a role in increasing the legitimacy and credibility of the Council's work. At the same time, it's important for the Nordic states to counter the so-called Nordic human rights paradox, which entails that we lecture others on human rights while being far from perfect at home. To practice what we preach is important, and I was pleased to see, for example, that a great part of Iceland's voluntary pledges on its Human Rights Council membership was devoted to improving human rights at home. The financial and liquidity crisis is an important factor in the UN's ability to promote and protect human rights, also in the Human Rights Council itself. The concrete work is already being affected, with dimming lights, closing parts of buildings, and the office announcing that there is a long list of measures that cannot be taken. And the 8 pages long list that was recently put forward features several reports on human rights promotion and protection that can't be delivered. It has many panels, workshops, and consultations that are being left out. So UN debts must be paid. In times of both political and financial hardships, one might wonder whether the ever-expanding agenda of the Human Rights Council should be reconsidered. Swamping the Council may be used as a tactic by some states to paralyze its efficiency, but a genuine discussion on core areas and increased efficiency should be welcomed. This would also allow smaller states to better take part in the Council's work if the number of resolutions and reports were diminished. Dear audience, in these somewhat gloomy times, we should neither take peace nor human rights for granted. And I'm glad every speaker here today has been saying the same thing. They need investment and defense. Coming from Finland, I'm all too familiar with the increased focus on military spending and widespread discussions on threats. I suggest that we need to have more discussions on peace and on structures that work for the benefit of peace, precisely like the Imagine Forum today. However, we must also talk to those who are not convinced, those who are not in this room today. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much to Katja for her presentation. And I'm also inviting to the floor the other panelists. We have Einar Gunnarsson, the permanent representative of Iceland to Geneva, including the Human Rights Council. We have Arndís Kristínardóttir, who is the president of Siðmennt here in Iceland, and we have Jessica Stern, who spoke previously before. And take up the time management system here, so that I also hope that the will be a way to us if we move too slow. Thank you all for being here. And it's a very interesting panel on a very in a very interesting discussion that we had here today. I wanted to start to move the ball from Katja to you, Einar, as the permanent representative of Iceland to Geneva and to the Human Rights Council in Geneva to give us a perspective, not just of Iceland, but of the Human Rights Council through the ongoing crisis. We have a political crisis, we have a budget crisis. We remember when the President of the United States spoke to the United Nations in New York, and he had a lot of complaints, but the main complaint was against the escalator at the UN building. In Geneva, he wouldn't even get on the escalator because the escalators had been turned off for a very long time. So stairs are an issue there. Einar, how do you in Geneva and the Human Rights Council see these issues that Katja described in this current context? And if you give us a perspective from Geneva.
Thank you, Kristján, and thank you all. It has been an exceptional day, with exceptional interventions and a lot of food for thought. Sitting here, trying to bring this together, what comes to my mind is that soft power is certainly not in fashion today. And as we have heard, while sort of hard power is really at the forefront of everything, as Katja has just gone over, and Jessica as well, and that really brings about challenges for us, working on human rights in Geneva. The human rights pillar of the UN is really about soft power. I think Nazanin mentioned this morning, that 1% of the overall budget of the UN budget goes to the human rights pillar, so it's minuscule in the overall scheme of things. And that, of course, might make people a bit depressed or pessimistic, but I'm a diehard optimist, and I believe that this is a pendulum. And I think also we heard from Vladimir and the others, the historians, the pendulum always comes around. And after periods of hard power, it has usually been soft power that has been needed to restore things. So I basically believe that it is about us now sort of preserving where we are at, so that we can actually pick up when the pendulum starts to swing into the other direction. At the Council, we see this very much sort of embodied in the ever-lasting conflict between sort of thematic approaches and country-specific approaches. That's actually a strange debate because the ratio between the two has been more or less the same for decades. Sometimes I feel, because when we are talking about the vast majority of governments, that sort of the small governments, we're also talking about the North-South divide, that some of my colleagues would like to rename the council as the Government Rights Council, but not the Human Rights Council. And that is really sort of at the core of everything that we are doing. We should be looking at the humans, their rights, their inalienable rights, and that's what we are really trying to do. And that's sometimes a tough job to bring the focus back onto the humans. But it is reflected in what we try to do at the council with the priorities. I'm not going to list them up here. Some of them have been mentioned. National mentioned, for example, the work that we have done on Iran over the years. So we will just continue to work on these priorities and knowing that the pendulum will swing back.
Thank you, Einar. We will hopefully be able to dive into some of the specifics also of the actions that a country like Iceland has taken and can take in a structure like the Human Rights Council. Now, I'm moving to the civil society perspective. Although you've been a member of parliament, now you're part of civil society, I would like to gain your perspectives on these issues, on the situation, the rights situation in the world, and how you see from the civil society perspective and your opinion some of the important issues that you would like to highlight in this.
Yes, thank you. I think it is a very good way to look at things is to look at this pendulum that we're talking about. And as I sometimes say that I learned not so long ago that we are not going forward. Mankind doesn't go forward, and it never did. We go in circles, go round and round. Maybe slowly we're going upwards. But there's a pessimism in that, but there's an optimism as well, which is this pendulum thought. I think what is most important today, I think a lot of people have this feeling of losing hope. It's easy to lose hope when you have this development that we are looking at, but it's not the first time, and it's not the second time. We've seen it in history. From the perspective of the civil society, I think what is important is to not be silenced. I like to imagine sometimes when I feel like, okay, I'm not going to answer this, there's no point in it. I try to imagine what if nobody said anything? And if you're thinking about the pendulum, it goes back and forth, and maybe there's a range, how far it will go and how fast it will swing back. And I think we sometimes underestimate the power of our words and our soft power. And I think, for example, like Katja said before, of course there is power in size, but there's also power in numbers. But it's not only in the numbers, it's also just in the word itself. I think everybody in here can relate to, for example, seeing some discussion online and there are 2 comments that say something. And suddenly you feel like everyone is saying that. Everyone is against this because 2 people are. And then you may see the same discussion somewhere else and it's not like that. So maybe these 2 people were just 2 people. This we can also use in our advantage. I think, for example, for the Icelandic authorities, the Icelandic government tends to, in my opinion, underestimate our size in the international arena, in the eyes of the world. I think we tend to underestimate our power, our authority that comes from the simple fact that we are right, humbly. Because we speak for human rights, we're the good guy. And of course we aren't, definitely. Like we aren't. There's no guarantee for it, and we cannot take it for granted. And this was very clear in Jessica's words here before, and I think that message is very important. But I think this is what civil society needs to, we need to give hope to people that their words actually matter, and they do a lot. And that goes for just, comments online. I'd like to mention a program that the Icelandic Queer Association actually has launched recently. That is basically a course on how to respond to hateful speech and hateful discussion. Gagnræða. I'm not sure if some of you may be familiar with it. I think this is a very useful tool for people in general, just at the family gathering. It's just teaching us tools, even phrases. They even have phrases that you can have tickets in your pocket that you can just use at the Christmas dinner where somebody is saying something not very nice, instead of saying nothing, because sometimes we don't know what to say. So I can recommend that, and I think maybe the government should be giving such courses in schools, just to save the sanity of people and also, of course, human rights.
Thank you very much. Now moving over to you, Jessica, we've heard mentioned soft power versus hard power, but I know also that you're concerned with the state of multilateralism and the situation that we are faced with. And I wanted to hear from you how you would address and respond as a diplomat and a special envoy previously from the most powerful country in the world, and to gain your opinions on are we what's the state of multilateralism and soft power right now?
I should get the easy questions because I was already on another panel. Thank you very much for that question, and thank you to the colleagues for the excellent remarks. Where to start? I'll give you the story I heard from a person who was forced out of the Trump White House 73 days after assuming a senior level position there. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, was coming to the United States, presumably on UN business, but also it was early in the Trump administration. And so he reached out to the Trump administration for a meeting, which is exactly what a high commissioner should do: engage governments, engage newly elected governments, establish dialogue, etc. And the people around Trump wanted to decline the meeting because they have a sort of existential critique of the UN. And I think that critique comes from an existential critique of being held accountable by domestic or international law. And this person that I know said, you can disagree, but take the meeting. Hear what he has to say and tell him exactly what you think, but at least establish the connection. This is a person of enormous institutional global power. And this person was laughed at for making this argument and fired because of it. And I was just floored by that. I mean, I'm still floored by that. So when we're not even willing to acknowledge the global influence and importance of the UN, and we have a seat on the UN Security Council, that is so dangerous for the entire institution. And actually, I feel like right now, one of the things that's making me feel safer in the world is Volker Turk, because I think Volker Turk consistently speaks out for human rights, even when it's uncomfortable. So I think we're in a crisis of multilateralism. I met with a private foundation a few days ago, and the representative that I met with has often funded the work of UN special mechanisms and NGOs that advocate in multilateral spaces. And I was just sort of asking her, where is she investing her resources right now, and what is she hearing from others in philanthropy? And she said, philanthropy is retreating from the UN because states are retreating from the UN. And it was another moment where I was completely horrified. And I thought, if states are retreating from the UN, then we need to be taking up more space because they don't want to be held accountable, and we have to make the arguments that these institutions matter. So I think where that leads me is that I think that we have to invest significantly more effort, especially those of us that are in civil society or academia, in making the case for why these institutions matter. And I really like Einar's point. I'm going to try to be an optimist. You're from a country where it's gray and rainy. I'm like a good. Someone said to me, "Oh, it's beautiful out today." I was like, "You know who you are." So to hear you say like I'm an optimist, but I'm not an optimist on this issue. But I do think we can do better. We can explain why the UN matters. And I'll give just a very fast example on this. I was teaching a class at Harvard this week, and I had to do like the UN 101. And people are like, yeah, but why it's so hard to get to the UN. It's far from my country. It privileges elite activism and strategies. And I was like, there's lots of problems with it. It's not a perfect space. But on my issue set, LGBTQ, on every major impact litigation case on LGBTQI rights for the last decade, both sides for and against LGBTQI equality have used data that came directly from the UN. So if we want to win on human rights struggles at the country level, we have to take advantage of what's coming out of international law.
Thank you. And moving on now to Kat.
So red means on, okay. About time I found out. Okay. Katja, you mentioned in your presentation exactly this, what's been happening, what the important roles of the UN are. But at the same time, we have now 30% less money in the UN than 2 years ago. We have the UN80 proposal of the Secretary General and his staff that's going to propose 20% cut of staff, allegedly. So, and a lot of reforms that still are to be discussed. So what's the way forward on this, and how do you react to these points of the role of academia and civil society with regards to the UN on supporting where the gap is now?
Thank you. Yes, just some very sporadic, I guess, comments or reflections. I guess the rainy day, I mean, I've learned that detta räddas, or how do you say the saying in Iceland, that everything will work out, so they are very sort of good on this, appreciating and being positive. But at the same time, where we have a crisis of multilateralism, I think we have the financial crisis is parallel. Connected, but also like the US has been paying, nobody is not pay, we don't want to pay for multilateralism anymore. And also, I think, well, if I'm honest, I think we less and less want to hear about the UN. Like there's nobody really in Finland, or not many I know of, that would do research on the UN or institutions. It's just sort of out of fashion. It's hard power, like we spoke. So what I'm trying to do back home is to talk about the UN and always explain the same things, that it's not only the Security Council, and it's much more, and it affects actually people's lives. But I also think we should remember that in most countries, there was a recent research that in most countries actually of the world, they are positive about UN, and they are feeling that it's working on their behalf. So I think we are also sort of, we're not the crisis, but we are part of that declining support for UN and whatever we can do to improve. I think participating concretely in the Council work, whether it's the Security Council or the Human Rights Council, is very important. And highlighting that, maybe highlighting the pendulum, that hard power is not everything. We will always come back to the softer side and need that as well. But I think one problem for Western countries is that at the same time when we all realize that the UN needs reform, and we say that we want every country to be well represented, and it doesn't reflect the reality we have today with the rising global south. At the same time, it's problematic for us because they might want to create different kind of rules. So we also need to reflect on, do we accept multilateralism as it is, or will produce something else than what we have been used to? So I think, more discussion on these different kind of multilateralism, what it produces, whether it's academia or government officials, I think is important.
So now the task is to push the pendulum, I think. I think we need to find a way how to push it so it swings a little bit faster to the other direction. And I wanted to hear from you, Einar, on some of the specific approaches that is possible to take at the Human Rights Council and on global human rights from that August body on specific issues. So you can go a little bit deeper into the methodology of how we can move and push the pendulum.
Thank you. And I mean, first I would pick up on what Jessica said, being a diplomat, I'm being paid not to sit down with those that agree with me. I'm being paid to sit down with those that we have the strongest disagreements with. So that is, of course, at the core of what we need to do, especially when we are dealing with soft power. So basically, we have to take on those issues and we have to engage on them. And that's why I think it was also very powerful, as I already mentioned, to hear from Nazanin this morning, sort of representing the views of some of those that are our constituents, the people on the ground, the people in Iran that actually feel that it is worth something that is being done. So I take that just as one example. Very powerful engagement we have had with people from Afghanistan as well. And just this week, we managed to get a new mechanism established on Afghanistan, independent investigative mechanism on Afghanistan. It was a struggle. Some did not want to, let's say, take too close of a look into that. We're thinking about sort of what was the scope in terms of time and what would be investigated, and I think we can all understand the reasons for that. But we managed to get that through. It is now on the docs. It will still need to be funded, but I believe that there are some clever ways of trying to work around these funding shortages that Katja was just talking about. Just when we talk about the Human Rights Council, which is of course just one level of the pillar of human rights, or sort of the top level of the human rights pillar at the UN. But we have to remember that it, as I said, it is soft in nature. So what it does is really to put focus on things. It doesn't have the power to stop human rights abuses as such. There are other elements within the system to do that. So we have the reports, we have the special procedure holders, the special rapporteurs, we have the fact-finding missions, we have the independent investigative mechanisms, and all of this is to collect knowledge that can later be used for whatever purposes, policy, judicial proceedings, and we shouldn't undermine the Council by thinking that it is something else. And this work is proceeding. I think in the session of the Council that just concluded, I took a look at it. We had more than 100 reports on the table in front of us for consideration over these 4 weeks. It is a challenge for small delegations. It's a stack this high. But we have ways of working with it, and therein comes civil society. It is an extremely important resource for us. I cannot stress it enough. Work on human rights without civil society engagement would only be the shadow of what it is. And in that regard, it is also very important to focus on human rights at home, as I thank the youth representatives for mentioning in their interventions. And the fact is, no one likes when they're being told something is not okay. It applies all across the world. I could cite a couple of examples here from Iceland. I know there are others that could cite them even better than I can. You may remember that there was a huge debate in the UK of getting rid of the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg because they didn't like some of the rulings that came from there. This comes from all over the place. No one likes to be told, that they are in the wrong. But it still needs to be done. So I encourage all of those that have civil society sort of connections here to continue that work. It is an absolutely essential element of what we are doing.
And this underlines this important point that governments and authorities, they need civil society, and civil society needs government. So it's this mutual arrangement that needs to be reinforced. And all the speakers here today have also mentioned the power in the numbers, the movement in Iran of women, life, freedom, the movement behind the recognition of Palestine, the letters that Vladimir Kara-Murza received in prison, the way it's possible to mobilize on LGBTQI plus rights, and you mentioned also that within the UN, the smaller countries can pull together. So let's move to the positive side on what's possible to do. And I thought it was very interesting to hear this morning that even in a dire situation like in Iran, Nazanin could present a 5-point plan on what every country can do. And I wanted to hear from you some ideas on how to actually get out of this hole that we're into. You have mentioned some, and I'll start with you, Jessica, and then Arndís.
I think I'll say two things, and I know my colleagues will have lots of ideas. One that we've already talked about, which is explain why the UN is relevant. I think people don't know. Some people don't even know how to spell UN. I watched one of those videos on TikTok or Instagram that's what the UN has done for you. And I'll probably butcher the fact, but in essence, you turn your phone on when you go to another country and suddenly you can get on the local network. Well, that's thanks to agreements the UN has negotiated. And I thought, oh my God, that's a really tangible thing that benefits me in my daily life. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. So we need to actually explain its relevance for people. There's a second thing that I want to say that I think requires more finesse. Which is that I think we have to be willing to acknowledge what hasn't worked at the UN so that we're credible in the current moment and try to streamline and rebuild better. So for those of us that are institutionalists, it can feel really hard to have that conversation because so much of the reform the UN critique feels hostile. Hostile to multilateralism and coming from bad actors. I think that we can reject the premise of those who are using those arguments to undermine the UN and undermine its human rights provisions while acknowledging there are things that we could do better. So I'm troubled by the proposal to consolidate UNFPA and UN Women, for example. But I've also been troubled by the fact that UN Women has not had adequate political or financial resources for years. So I do think that in the reconstruction, we can find ways of creating potentially more political power through some of the consolidation that's coming.
And Arndís, you want to follow up and add some points?
Yes, I think it's true that many people have kind of forgotten what the United Nations is about in the UN and everything. And this is just simply because we forget easily. And history repeats itself not necessarily in a very long period of time. I think it's important to go back to basics a little bit. Of course, we want to protect the United Nations because it has proven, despite many flaws, it has proven to still be quite effective in protecting what it was intended to protect, which is peace. And I think that's maybe what we need to remind us and everyone of. Why did we do this in the beginning? Of course, there are flaws, but why are we doing it? And I think it is easy to explain to everyone why we would want to have international law that we all agree that we want to abide by. And I think simple things as just, that another country cannot invade another, just simple rules like that. And to remind people that human rights are part of international law. And that human rights is not just some established, some institutionalized sympathy because we feel sorry for some people. Human rights are invented, are how to say, the human came up with it because it is the key to peace. And for us to live in a community where everyone can be fine. And that means everyone, also me and also you, not just the sorry ones. It's sometimes I feel like today, even in Iceland, when we talk about human rights, people talk like, we don't have, we can't be bothered to think about that. That's a luxury sympathy issue we don't have time to deal with now because we are in crisis. And then we have forgotten what it's about. It's really about what we all want, which is peace and stability. So I think that's what we need to go back a little bit, back to basics and talk about the reason for everything from the beginning, remind us of the history. I think it is problematic how governments that are for the UN and for international law are not upholding it in their own actions. I think because international law has very limited tools for enforcement, but still there are tools and we're not using them and it's a little bit arbitrary. And for example, if I just take Iceland as an example, Iceland has its independence, its existence, relying on international law being respected. We are tiny, but we are still very powerful and we have to use that. I mean, it has been mentioned twice here today that people are so honored to come here because Iceland was the first one to recognize Lithuania, one of the first to recognize Palestine. We did that and nobody came and blew us up for it. It actually had the opposite effect. Actually, people listened and they followed. So we do have authority. And why should we do that? Because we are for international law. We want to uphold it. So we should start by doing it ourselves. And I think we can have much more confidence in that. And we should just be more loyal to it. I think that's a very important step.
Thank you. And Katja, now if we look at the ongoing reform proposals for an organization that has these crises happening, and there is already a risk or a threat that if the reform process means going back to the basic roles of the UN from the origin, that the rights-based organizations will be left aside, that they are too much of a nuisance to those who are behind some of the proposals. So I would like to hear your opinions on how to protect the rights-based, the human rights side of the UN during these proposals that are intended to streamline the organization and use funds better.
Well, thank you. I guess if I had a solution, I would not be sitting here. I would be in New York doing that. But so I get some random comments. I'm one of the persons with, in my handbag, I have the little blue book on the UN Charter. So I'm that kind of person. And I know that they mention human rights there in the preamble already. So I think it should be difficult to sort of set aside that. But I just wanted to say that I think also not to, how to emphasize the role of the UN. I think it's very important when we talk about the UN also to say most of us come from small states here, so to say that it's the only place that every state has a voice, the United Nations General Assembly, and to explain that there really is not, an alternative to that. And still, I'm trying to be positive, so when it's the UN high-level week, people still want to be there. So although they are critical, they still show up and give speeches. Even Trump, maybe not next year after the escalator broke down. But they still want to be there, and I would say that, in the larger scale, there is also an joint understanding that we need to reform the World Organization. So there are some positive steps, but then, of course, how to amend the charter is impossible. But peace and security should be in focus, but so should the human rights. It's there, and I will open my little blue book and show them next time if they forget about it. So I think it can't, of course, be. It's indivisible from the charter. So.
Sorry, Katja, what else do you have in your handbag?
Everything you need.
Einar, do you want to pick up the point? Because you've also been a permanent representative to the UN in New York and now in Geneva, and we have these processes going on and this ongoing, let's call it a crisis situation and then a reform process.
Well, I said earlier I was an optimist, and the optimist will at least have a better day, Maybe wrong at the end of the day, but we'll have a better day. But having said that, on this, there is always the possibility of using whatever situation you are dealing with for better or for worse. And clearly it is so that the current financial crisis, which is bringing up on the UN, we know it. The money will not be coming, and if we do nothing, there will be some kind of a flat reduction of everything. So basically, the main driving force is to not do the stupid thing and just cut everything equally, but rather to try to do it in a more smart way and do more of the things that we need to do and less of the things that we could possibly get away with. And this crisis mode might make some of the attempts that have been ongoing for years and decades, maybe just this slight possibility that there would be more successful of dealing with it in a targeted way. So I think that is sort of what we hear when we are discussing this at sort of the small group levels. Everyone is rooting for that. How can we avoid doing it in the stupid way and rather try to force it more into the direction of doing smart reorganization, smart cuts, fund better the things that we need to fund. Jessica mentioned some, and maybe do away with some of the institutional hierarchy that has built up over the years in an organization that has a very difficult sort of governance structure. The member states, we talk about it as mandates, the member states are constantly giving mandates to the UN organization, and then every mandate becomes holy. It cannot be touched. And when we do that, the member states, we are sort of forcing ourselves into this stupid direction. So we have to, and this probably means that on some occasions we will have to tolerate seeing something sort of in this change that we would not be as happy about, just so that we don't take away the willingness to try to do it in a smart way. So that would be.
There was someone who said that you could never let a good crisis go to waste. So that's the question if this is a hopeful message. So let's open up the floor if there are any questions from the floor. And but I really encourage you before that you state your name and maybe an affiliation. You don't need to do that, but state your name. And it's for questions, not comments or speeches. First, top row there. Do you want to point it to anyone special, or is it to the panel?
I'm asking all of you, what do you think about the possibility that one mission could increase the responsibilities on the UN, on the World States, with regard to human rights and related?
We're having difficulty hearing.
Yes, we didn't hear it very well. You can also state it in Icelandic, and we can translate to the speakers.
Okay.
Takk hérlega fyrir þetta. So he's asking, would another mission to the moon increase the authority of the UN and the respect for the UN? Let's take a few more, and then we can, if there are other questions from the panel, otherwise we can go to answer this one and discuss further.
I wanted to ask you, before becoming an academic, I was in feminist activism, and I wanted to ask you, what can feminists and LGBTQI plus people do together because it seems to me that there's a big overlap in what we're fighting for.
Should we take one more if there is one more from the... It's a very polite crowd. One over there.
My name is Paul Davison from the UN Association of Iceland and long-term UN employee. I believe my question maybe missed Katja, maybe Einar a little bit. So we've been asking ourselves, what can Iceland do to deal with its current crisis, multilateralism and Humanist facing? I find it interesting that Finland, for instance, you have a strategy on Finland's new era of cooperation, I think it's called, right? And Norway has a white paper on Norway and multilateralism, where you have literally strategically identified the opportunities for Finland and Norway to support multilateralism, looking at all the tools at the disposal of society, right? Very detailed analysis of what these countries can do, right? So I'm just wondering, what is the experience of Finland in approaching multilateralism from that perspective? For instance, Norway made it a priority of its foreign policy to support multilateralism, right? So could Iceland be following similar examples as we've been doing in the other Nordic countries?
Thank you. So let's start with Jessica, because to address the feminist, or do you want to have a moment to think? So Katja, you start, and then Einar, then Arndís, then Jessica, and you address the questions that were pointed to you, and also the general question.
Yes, I'll start with this last question, because to the second that was directed to Jessica, and the first I'm still contemplating. So on the multilateralism side, I think what inspired Finland at least to look at it, produce a report, and there were some. Our institute was also involved in doing research on multilateralism and its future. So I think here the example really comes from the European Union. And I won't urge Iceland to join the EU. I always try to do that with Norway and miserably fail. But I think because many European Union or EU member states, or some, was looking, Germany in particular is important for Finland also in terms of bilateral relations, and Germany was doing an exact similar exercise. And I think EU is very much focusing on, from effective multilateralism to now talking about strategic multilateralism and how we sort of combine values and multilateralism. So I think this inspired Finland to look at it as well. And of course, now we have, after that, a new multilateral forum to test our findings in, of course, NATO is also a multilateral forum, which is in which we need to be strategic. And I think also the realization that multilateralism is more and more a struggle, and you need to really think about how to be smart in that. But I think it relates to the EU discussions and debates more. So, yeah.
Thank you. As we heard very clearly today from the Foreign Minister of Palestine, there is nothing given in sort of being a state among states. That is something that only sort of materializes if you work actively for it and the conditions are right. So for Iceland, multilateralism has been at the core of everything. It was at the core of how we behaved during World War II, how sort of we went about establishing our republic or replacing the Kingdom of Iceland with the Republic of Iceland. And it was very much at the center of everything when we choose which international organizations to join and which not. And these are political choices, but of course, being an independent state, having a voice, it's all about using that voice. If you don't use it, you lose it. So we have to decide how we can use it, and we try to use it in support of multilateralism. We are not a military power, and we will never be. And so for us, that is at the core of our interest, of having a strong multilateral system and being an active participant where we can, and try to sort of have something to bring to the table. And on the first question, it is always so that when we have something big with a big purpose that can unite us, it can have a lot of positive benefits. So what it could be, I'm not going to say anything about that, but these great undertakings are really important to give purpose to everything that we are working on. So in that sense, there is a thought in that. So I thank you for that. And
thank you. I'm going to address the moon mission question first. I'm also an attorney, so I have a lot of clients that have conflicts of some sort. And it quite often comes to my mind, okay, people just need to have something to do. People are just, they don't have enough, how to say, joy and things to do. So maybe a common distraction would be useful to get us out of this, this guy bombing that guy, this kind of situation. So I'm going to say maybe it would increase our sense of unity for it, but it would have to be a common mission. Of course, the last one was a competition, so maybe it would turn into the opposite. Just very quickly about the question regarding the feminist movement and the LGBTIQA+. Someone said recently, if you put all the minorities in the world together, you don't have a lot of people left. So they're definitely not the minority. And of course, it's a very, very typical and very basic strategy of those who want to undermine human rights to pose minority groups or just people, different groups against each other. So I think the key is to stick together and to realize that this is not about women's rights, this is not about trans rights, this is not about anything, it's about human rights. And I think that's a focus that we can always, and we should always keep. Our interests are the same when it comes to human rights. They are, everyone, also the tiny majority.
Thanks for that question. I think that there's already a lot of overlap and coordination between feminists and LGBTQI activists. Some feminists are members of the LGBTQI community. A lot of members of the LGBTQI community are feminists. Not everyone, but there are points of intersection. I think we're working really well together on the CSW, on a lot of the UPRs, and frequently on the special mechanisms. But to answer in the specific, I think there are 3 places where we can do better. I feel that there's not enough centralized, coordinated advocacy by the women's rights and gender equality movement at UN headquarters spaces. And I felt that way for a long time due to the collapse of some organizations, the emergence of others that have gone in different directions as leadership transitions have happened. But I feel like we're really on our back foot in terms of a consistent, coordinated, proactive strategy. So that feels like a place of opportunity and a gap. And if there's anyone in the room who is secretly a billionaire and you are waiting for someone to ask, this would be a great area to invest. A second point that I want to emphasize is I think with the restructuring of the UN, some of the UN agencies that have been the most dependable allies, both to feminists and LGBTQI people, are on the chopping block. Whether it's UN Women or UNAIDS or UNFPA or UNESCO, like these are some of the places where we need to come out whole. And I think we can make common cause with each other. And then to just end with, I think, one of the more complicated issues, the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women has traditionally been, in my mind, one of the most important special mechanisms. And whether I'm wearing my feminist hat or my LGBTQI hat, has been an indispensable source of redress for vulnerable people. The current mandate holder is violently anti-trans, but is clever enough to make it seem like she's not, unless you read all of her work in detail, and then it's voluminous. And I don't think that LGBTQI activists can hold the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women accountable in the way that women's rights activists can and must. So that's an area where we can and should do better coordination with each other. Thank you for your question. And I want to be a part of the moon mission.
So our time is up. Thank you very much to the panelists for this lively discussion. And I think there's a break now before the next session. Thank you.